Hi, Andrew from SACS, and welcome to video number 5 in our 8-video sequence on Have you hired any psychopaths lately? Which is really a scientific investigation of the question of what we call counterproductive work behaviours, people doing bad stuff either to colleagues or to the organisation. And in this one, we'll be talking about personality and bad behaviours. We've talked about cognitive ability, and in the next one, we'll be talking about values and bad behaviours. And really the purpose of this video sequence is to help you to understand, particularly when you're recruiting, what the signatures are, the signs of these characteristics, particularly as they relate to psychometric assessment. The work of Kibiam Lee and Mike Ashton showed us that there are 6 dominant personality factors in human beings. Previously, there were thought to be only 5, but Kibiam and Mike demonstrated that there are 6. Now, there has been a stack of research which has taken place since that discovery, and what we are doing here is showing you how that research relates to the work world. Now, SACS, in partnership with Deakin University, built a thing called the SACS, which is a work-worded version of the Hexaco model of personality. What we're talking about here is that these 6 characteristics: integrity-modesty. Integrity-modesty is really about being honest and truthful and not arrogant. And if you're going to predict negative behaviours, this is the most significant predictor. This correlates very heavily with what Kibiam and Mike called honesty-humility, and subsequent research linking honesty-humility scores back to things in the real world shows, for instance, that people who are low in this characteristic tend to go to jail far more often than people who are high in it. People who are high in it tend to have better relationships, are more successful in business, are more trusted. Now, it's also been demonstrated that low honesty-humility scores tend to correlate quite heavily with things like bullying, harassment, sexual harassment, those kinds of things. And in our own research, we've demonstrated that there's a strong link between other negative behaviours like theft and so forth if you are low in honesty humility. So try to recruit people who are high in honesty humility. Emotionality. And emotionality is the degree to which a person is emotionally stable or unstable. Low emotionality is a good thing generally because it means that a person tends to be more resilient. Now, people who are high in emotionality don't always do evil stuff. I mean, they may in fact simply be involved in things like absenteeism. But high emotionality says that the person is likely to struggle to cope if they're exposed to high pressure, for instance. The third characteristic that we want to talk about in terms of avoiding negative behaviours is absence of anger. Now, in the Hexaco, they call this agreeableness. And in fact, I thought that term was a little misleading because agreeableness is really a characteristic in the big 5 of sort of being easy to get along with. But in the Hexaco, agreeableness, low agreeableness means anger. So we called it absence of anger. And all the questions in this instrument are worded to the work world. So there are no general questions about parties and those sorts of things that you tend to find in general personality assessments. But what we do know is that when people are low in absence of anger, that's a characteristic called trait anger. And trait anger is a predictor of negative behaviours. We know, for instance, that in service or caring environments where people are angry, they tend to do bad stuff, particularly interpersonal bad stuff more often. The next characteristic that we're looking at is conscientiousness. And so people who are highly conscientious tend to do less bad things, particularly to the organisation, than people who are low in conscientiousness. So they tend to persist in trying to achieve their goals. They tend to take their responsibilities seriously. They tend to obey the rules when appropriate. And so high conscientiousness is a good thing. By the way, high conscientiousness is also correlated with productivity at work. So obviously that's a good thing in its own right. And finally, there's this extroversion characteristic called likes to be in company. Now, likes to be in company is really where the person likes to work with other people, likes colleagues, has a positive view of other human beings. And this has been shown to be a predictor of positive behaviours and a predictor of negative behaviours. Psychopaths typically are low in this characteristic, this integrity-modesty or honesty-humility characteristic, tend to be low in conscientiousness, and I expressed in an earlier video, this is why so few people at higher echelons of organisations are psychopaths, because they tend to be too disorganised to get there. And finally, likes to be in company is the degree to which a person likes other people. So low honesty, humility or integrity, modesty, low conscientiousness, low likes to be in company. That's a scary combination and can indicate psychopathy. Now, if you're psych testing people, I wouldn't suggest you accuse them of being psychopaths, but if they have that characteristic, I mean, even one or two of those things may well be a knockout factor. Would you really want to recruit people who are low in honesty? Would you really want to recruit people who aren't prepared to try? Would you really want to recruit people who just don't care about other people? So individually these matter, but in combination, they may be an indicator of what we call the dark triad. So things like psychopathy, narcissism, Machiavellianism. People place an enormous amount of trust in the question of values in predicting bad behaviours. They think that that's the most important thing. In fact, it's nowhere near as important as cognitive ability. How smart people are is a way better predictor of whether they're likely to do bad stuff. Smarter people do less bad stuff. Personality is a massively more important predictor of whether people are likely to do bad stuff. These are largely genetic, and genes will out. And I guess Heraclitus, or Heraclitus, depending on which school you went to back in ancient Greece, said character is destiny. Personality is character, and that will tend to drive behaviours much more significantly than values. But values do have an influence, and values are largely taught, so it creates this confidence that we can improve negative behaviours through teaching good values. Join me for the next video, video number 6 in this sequence, where we'll talk about values and bad behaviours.